Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Danielle. Mark is not with us today, but I am here. I'm excited to talk about one of the questions we received. So thank you for submitting that. So this is a Mago Nutrition podcast where we answer your questions and give practical nutrition strategies to help you and your family flourish. If you are concerned about the amount of sugar in your diet or your child's diet, you might be wondering if artificial sweeteners are a smart alternative. So they've been around for so long, it feels like the talk about whether they're a good choice, smart choice, or not so smart choice is constantly being brought up. So I was glad to be able to have the time to look into some research this morning because as outpatient dietitian for 12 years, I didn't necessarily get a lot of time to research, to be honest. So it feels good to be able to dive in a little bit more to be more up to date. Um, So if you have a question, please head over to our website, Imago Nutrition, IMAGO nutrition.com/podcast, and submit your question, and we'll hopefully be able to feature it on an episode. So our question today is, will you please talk a little more about zero sugar alternatives, i.e. stevia or aspartame? So thank you, Shannon from Tennessee, for your question today. I think it is a really great one that's on the minds of many people. And as you can see, her question isn't necessarily specific, just kind of gathering information. And so that's what we're going to do today. Just kind of give some definitions and how the FDA approves sugar substitutes, and what that process looks like, and then dive into some research and then get some takeaways. So that's kind of what we're going to do today. So first off, sugar substitutes are a compound that mimics sweet taste at a much lower calorie level. So that there shows you the desire or the benefit behind why people might choose sugar substitutes, to have a lower calorie option, but to still enjoy a sweet taste. So each sugar substitute sweetness is measured in relationship to the sweetness of sucrose or table sugar. Everyone's taste buds are different, and it is interesting how it's a receptor on your taste bud that levels the sweetness for each person. But when you measure it in science, it is going to be compared to the sweetness of sucrose or table sugar. So there's actually two categories of sugar substitutes. One is referred to non-nutritive sweeteners. So there in the title, we get some information, non-nutritive. So they're not going to be giving our body necessarily anything beneficial. So obviously nutritive would be giving our body something beneficial. But non-nutritive sweeteners, NNS, have a much higher sweetening intensity compared to sucrose. And so we're going to dive into some specifics of those. The other category is low calorie sweeteners, and that's abbreviated LCS. And those are low digestible carbohydrates derived from their sugar sources. And these can be about 25 to 100% the sweetness of sucrose. So they're not necessarily higher in sweetness level. Sometimes they're actually a little bit lower. And these are often referred to as sugar alcohols. So on the label, they will end in OL. So a couple examples are mannitol, maltitol, sorbitol, and xylitol. Okay. So if it ends in OL on the nutrition label in the ingredients, you're looking at a sugar alcohol. Sometimes that will also be listed, not just in ingredients, but in the actual label portion. So that's a little bit about what sugar substitutes are, and there are a lot of them. I'll get into kind of how many are approved, but before we do that, The FDA, how they approve a sugar substitute is first, they look at how it is made. So, is it made in a safe way? Second, they look at which foods it is going to be used in. And then, how much will the average person consume each day? Okay. And is it potentially harmful to the person's health? And sometimes toxicology studies in animals may be used for this. So after they looked at all of those things, they then set a limit that is the amount a person can safely consume based on their body weight. And the limit is usually many, many more times than the average person will eat. So an example that was given in my research was a 40-pound child would need to have 4 12-ounce cans of diet soda every day to reach this limit. And remember, this limit is considered safe. Okay, so it's not like this limit, you hit that and it's not safe anymore for your health. So they have a high limit for 12-ounce cans of diet soda. So a 40-pound child, that is looking at maybe like a 5-year-old or so, 4 to 5-year-old, depending on that child. But I think there was also a comparison of 24 packets of sweetener or the 4 12-ounce cans. Okay, so sugar substitutes can be found in diet soda, as we just mentioned, dairy products, powdered drink mixes. This could be something like Crystal Light or sugar-free hot cocoa. It could be in baked goods. So they would be labeled like sugar-free, or they would be labeled low calorie, some sort of way like that. Desserts, candy, sugar-free candy, for example, chocolates, puddings, sugar-free pudding, for example, jams, jellies, and chewing gum. So those are some possible sources that might be in, your diet or your grocery store where you can look at labels for these things. And when you're looking at labels, we're going to talk about that kind of at the end, but most often you're going to be looking in the ingredient list, and you can find those words that end in OL. Sucralose is Splenda, for example, and I believe stevia is written just as stevia. So sometimes it's pretty obvious if a sugar substitute is listed in the ingredients, it's in there, and sometimes it's a little less obvious. But we can talk about that. So some claims that I heard in my years at Missouri Baptist were sugar substitutes cause cancer, they raise blood sugar, they cause me to, want sweet foods, or sometimes people would say they actually help myself curb my sweet tooth. Okay, so two sides on that one, that they either cause me to want sweet things more often, or they actually help me to get rid of my sweet tooth or curb my sweet craving. So some claims we're going to look at today, we'll touch on that, but also from this study, the effects of sweeteners on gut microbiota. And we kind of talked about this in a recent episode. You could go back to that, about how important the gut microbiome is in overall health. So the gut is often considered like the second brain because it's so important to mental health and physical health. And so the effects of sweeteners on the gut can really give us some insight on whether it's impacting other areas of our health. So this is a review of experimental studies and clinical trials, and it is a lengthy article or piece of research. The claims that they started off in the beginning talking about was non-nutritive sweeteners contributing to glucose intolerance through alterations in the intestinal microbiota. And so what this means is basically non-nutritive sweeteners disturbing the body's ability to process sugar by changing the bacteria in the gut. So we're going to look at that, if that is true or false. And then the possible positive claim, sugar substitutes reduce blood sugar. because they are lower in carbohydrates than their counterparts. So this, I can tell you is true. So like if you have a sugar-free product, it is lower in carbohydrates. And so therefore you're definitely going to get a lower spike in your blood sugar. But just kind of consider that while we talk. Overall, is that the way to go? Is choosing the sugar substitutes or, having smaller portions of that high carbohydrate food. Or just maybe possibly, can you use less sugar in making that carbohydrate food? Okay. And another one is excessive consumption of sugar alcohols may cause GI symptoms. Okay, so this is a common thing that I heard as well. And so we're going to start to summarize now, because in this lengthy piece of research, they talk through each of the 20 sugar substitutes approved by the FDA. And these are also approved by the European Union and the European Food Safety Authority and the Codex. I don't really know what that is, but some kind of government, agency looking at the safety of these additives. So they evaluated and confirmed that non-nutritive sweeteners and low-calorie sugar substitutes are safe for human consumption and do not cause cancer or other related problems, as long as they are consumed within the acceptable daily intake. And so acceptable daily intake, then you might say, well, how much is that? So when we talked about like that limit before, those are very high levels. Is in this article, it gives you the acceptable daily intake for each approved sugar substitute, and it's listed as milligrams per kilogram, because remember, it's per body weight per day. And so again, these are very high limits. So I gave you the example of that child and having to have 4 diet sodas a day to reach the limit that is considered safe. Okay, so that's what I want you to remember. But what's really great, always we want to hear does not cause cancer. That's always good to hear. But so what this research concluded is there are some long-term prospective studies that raise concern about the consumption of artificial sweeteners, as they might contribute to the development of some metabolic syndromes and lead to obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. And then it follows that up with there are some gaps in evidence related to the effects of non-nutritive sweeteners on appetite, short-term intake. So, is that true, that statement I just said about sweeteners leading to obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease? Is that true, for short-term intake or minimal intake? So there's a lot of gaps in the research and gaps in the research for the risk of cancer and diabetes. So the effects of sweeteners on the gut microbiota are not completely clear. So this is, you'll kind of hear a back and forth with the things I'm about to say. So first of all, within the non-nutritive sweeteners, only saccharin and sucralose, which is Splenda, shift the populations of gut microbiota. So when they say shift the populations, they're talking about the bacteria, whether they increase the bacteria or change or add, feed one bacteria and that one increases or decrease the bacteria of another one, because there's so many different strains of bacteria in your gut. The ingestion of saccharin by animals and humans showed alterations in metabolic pathways that links to glucose tolerance and the imbalance of organisms present in the gut, which is called symbiosis. However, more human studies are needed to clarify. These are considered preliminary observations. within nutritive sweeteners. Okay, so nutritive sweeteners, they are considering only stevia extracts may affect the gut microbiota composition. So some parts of the stevia plant weakly inhibit the bacteria in the GI tract, while other parts of the plant improve the growth of select microorganisms. So one fun fact for you is stevia is actually 250 times sweeter than sucrose. So that is just, a side note for you. But the nutritive sweeteners of stevia, you can tell if some parts of the plant weakly inhibit the bacteria and some parts of the plant actually improve the growth of some bacteria. It's kind of not necessarily a win for that. When we go into the sugar alcohols, they reach the colon, and that is why they can induce, dose dependent, obviously how much you have. They can have some GI upset, such as gas or bloating, diarrhea, things like that. And this is especially important for people with inflammatory bowel disease. So yes, we want to be careful of excessive consumption of those sugar alcohols. And as we mentioned earlier, because those sugar alcohols are not as sweet sometimes as sugar, some of them may be added at a higher level than something like stevia, which is 250 times sweeter. So that's kind of why I mentioned that. So it might be a little bit easier to have more of the sugar alcohols versus the stevia. Several of the sugar alcohols, including isomalt and mannitol, increase the good bacteria in healthy subjects. So that's a positive. And they have what's called prebiotic action. So that's what that means. Prebiotic action means that they provide food for the good bacteria in your gut. So some isomalt and maltitol increase the bifidobacteria, which is that good bacteria, by feeding those. And then the other hand, though, is some of these sugar alcohols in some different human clinical trials showed that lactol decreases the populations of some of these strands. So in my eyes, now we're back to the food to really positively impact our gut. So if we have some sugar alcohols that maybe increase one of the strands by feeding it, but then some of these other sugar alcohols decrease the other strands. Again, that's not necessarily a win in my eyes. So we always say it's best to have food first. Not that this is necessarily a supplement, but food such as those prebiotic foods, high-rich fiber foods, are going to feed your gut in that positive way always. So one more piece of research to look at today is data from a Women's Health Initiative, which is a large prospective observational cohort study. So they looked at women who consumed an average of 2 or more artificial sweetened beverages per day. So that's greater than 24 ounces or equal to 24 ounces a day, had an elevated risk of stroke, ischemic stroke, and all-cause mortality compared to those who consumed less than one artificial sweetened beverage per week. And they said they adjusted for demographics, cardiovascular disease history, risk factors, BMI, health behaviors, and other overall diet quality. However, they weren't able to eliminate all of the, research bias. So these findings are consistent with some, but not all other prospective cohort studies in diverse U.S. populations. So, they were talking about women, so they didn't look at men, and they didn't necessarily look at, I think it was only whites that they looked at in this study. So they need to look at other diverse U.S. populations and show, the frequency of consumption adjusting for other things like was there pre-existing stroke, diabetes, dementia, other vascular risk factors. So without that, you can't know the causal nature of these associations. So adults who frequently consumed artificial sweetened beverages, where they, spent early adult years consuming sugar sweetened beverages daily, and then they switched when they were, maybe overweight or pre-diabetic. Or maybe they consume the artificial sweetened beverages for a long period of time with a healthy, nutrient-dense diet. Or it could be something completely else, like maybe they rarely consume sugar sweetened beverages and only incorporated artificial sweetened beverages later to reduce calorie intake. So to better understand the impact of artificially sweetened beverages consumption on vascular disease, we do need to get a better picture of duration, patterns, and reasons for consumption, as well as the other confounding factors such as obesity and insulin resistance, weight change, and dieting habits prior to the study. Those can all give us a better picture of how the artificial sweetened beverages impact cardio health. To conclude, I know this is quite a short episode today, but to conclude, we obviously can't look at all of the studies, even if I had all day to do that. We couldn't look at all of the studies about sugar sweetened beverages. I chose the first piece because it's a review of many clinical trials. And as you heard, there's still gaps in the research, and further studies are needed. And then as you saw in the second piece of research, again, further studies are needed as well. So I'm thinking you're going to see that pattern when you dig into research, that there's still more studies needed. So it's really actually hard in research to eliminate all of the compounding factors such as obesity, insulin resistance, and dietary habits. And they can make a big difference, obviously, on health and, risk factors of stroke and diabetes, for example. So what I suggest is to practice reading labels to learn your sources of sugar substitutes. Do you only get sugar substitutes in an occasional diet soda, or do you get sugar substitutes in your yogurt and your lemonade, your sugar-free lemonade, and your diet candy? How many different sources do you have of the sugar substitutes? And that can contribute to your total intake. So just take a look at those labels again in the ingredient list. And the next thing would be to remember the limit that is really high is actually still considered safe. Okay, so just remember that limit that is high is considered safe. So occasional sugar substitute consumption cannot outweigh the impact of a nutrient-dense whole foods diet or eating pattern. I hate the word diet. Plus, active lifestyle. So those two things, just eating whole foods and moving your body is definitely going to significantly outweigh occasional sugar substitute consumption. So what we've kind of said a lot on podcasts is we just don't really need to go to extremes. We don't need to scare ourselves. That just increases anxiety and worry and stress, and that's not good for our body. So, still, try to dig into research on occasion if you can, but try not to get worked up about it, and think about, what you can control. And that is, you can look at reading labels, and you can watch how much you're consuming of these sugar substitutes. Another way is to look at the question a little differently. So instead of asking, are sugar substitutes okay? Why do we feel we need them? So I think sometimes is we're trying to avoid added sugar entirely, and that's why we're turning to sugar substitutes. So I always remember, I have a sweet tooth, and I always remember that I can have sweet things and I can have regular sugar, and it is not going to hurt my health. It just needs to be with everything in moderation. So taking out of your head that you need 0 grams of added sugar in a day, that's one, unrealistic. There's so much sugar in all foods. And so the added sugar, again, is not the same as natural sugar. So there's natural sugar in fruit. So that's one way I help with my sweet tooth, is just having fruit more often. I try to aim for 1 to 2 servings of fruit a day. I mean, not servings, but having it 1 to 2 times per day. It's full of fiber, so it's going to help you feel full as well as help with the sweet tooth. And so remembering that your goal is not 0. So for women, the American Heart Association recommends 6 teaspoons or less of added sugar per day. So women and children are actually the same. So 6 teaspoons for women and children or less per day. And then for men, it's 9 teaspoons of added sugar or less per day. And so how you determine how much added sugar you're getting is you take the line underneath the total sugar that says how many grams of added sugar. You're only going to look at that line, and you're going to divide that by 4. So in 1 serving of that food, you divide that number by 4. That's how many teaspoons you're going to get. So if there's 8 grams of added sugar in 1 bar, for example, you are going to get 2 teaspoons of added sugar of your total, 6 or 9 in the day. And sometimes you can think about these foods as maybe you can choose foods that will actually benefit your health too. So one of my favorite examples is kefir. Kefir is going to feed and contribute to increasing the populations of that good bacteria in your gut. It has 12 strains of good bacteria for your gut. It has vitamin D, which is limited in our food supply. It has calcium, it has protein, and it has added sugar. And so sometimes people look at that added sugar and dismiss it. And it's like, oh my goodness, so many other benefits to that food, that just 2 teaspoons of added sugar in that product, while it seems like a lot, is so worth it. 2 teaspoons is because when you have more of that bacteria in your yogurt or your kefir, it is more tart. So this product doesn't necessarily taste sweet. It tastes super tart too. And so that's one reason people choose a lot of sugar in their yogurt, is because if it has a good amount of probiotics in it, it's going to taste kind of tart. So that's sometimes why people don't like Greek yogurt as well. So think about just slowly getting your taste buds adjusted to a lower added sugar level. Sweetening your foods on their own is going to be really beneficial. So that is one reason why I have steered away from sugar substitutes, is not because I feel like they cause cancer. Again, I feel like you'd have to have so much of that to contribute to any risk of cancer, in addition to other things that can be risk factors for cancer, such as being overweight or lack of exercise, things like that. So I am, not saying that's the reason. I definitely choose to have regular sugar, and I choose to sweeten my foods with other things like fruit. And trying to have just an overall less sweet diet can really help decrease the sweet cravings and just decreasing the frequency. So, like I said, I have a sweet tooth. And so if I kind of just commit to a frequency per week of having desserts, maybe 2, maybe 3 times a week, maybe incorporating some fruit for dessert. And it's not like that dessert is always like, a brownie or a cookie or a cake, maybe it could be a graham cracker with peanut butter. And so that can just really help with getting rid of that like addiction type feeling. And that makes it more maintainable. So I just encourage you to be really realistic, to remember that there are some interesting things in the research about these sugar substitutes, but there are still a lot of gaps. So keep, checking in on the research, read those labels as best you can, and then just consider your preference where you want to be. Do you want to occasionally add them in? Do you want to just use regular sugar as you can, and overall decrease the sweetness of your diet? So I really hope you have found this helpful today. I thank you again for the question. And so if you are looking for some help in decreasing added sugar in your diet, or decreasing sugar cravings, or maybe you're, turning to the sugar substitute to just decrease calorie intake. So if you'd like some help with weight loss, just send us a message. We'd be happy to chat with you and help you with that. And so if you have found this episode helpful, please share it with a friend, subscribe to our podcast, or just leave us a review. We'd love to know how we're doing. And you can also follow us on all of our social media platforms. So we'd love to thank Happy Pill for our theme song, Thinkin Bout Food. See you next time.